But this is the story. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, has finally done something about cycling. He's actually said that now they will introduce a new law which means that dangerous cyclists will be punished just as much as dangerous drivers. Nick Freeman is here. Nick, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. This is a step in the right direction, is it not? But a lot of people saying, how exactly will it work? How exactly, without registration and without knowing who cyclists are, will we be able to make this law work?
Well, it's a good point. Look, I think it's a good day for road safety generally. I think it will make the road safer. To answer your question specifically, cyclists who are involved, and it's important to bear in mind that there's a tiny minority who are involved in these serious incidents, but they tend to be detained at the scene, they tend to fall off the bike, they stay about. So we're not talking about minor skirmishes, we're talking about serious skirmishes that result in either very serious injury or even worse, fatalities. Yeah. They tend not to leave, and obviously the public will be involved if they sought to leave. And what the law is now saying is, if you cycle in a dangerous way, or if you even cycle without due care and attention or inconsiderately, and the consequences of that are that someone's going to be seriously injured, you are looking at a lengthy period of custody. And I'm sure this will have a massive effect on the way people cycle. So, yes, there isn't a registration system at the moment. This is definitely a move in the right direction. It's holding cyclists to account. And I'm sure it will have massive support from the public, because at the end of the day, we want to encourage cycling. It's about making our road space, our pavement safer. And if people are responsible, if they're going to be held to account, it will be a safer place for everybody. Yes. So this is definitely good news. And it's not anti-cycling, and it's very important that the cyclists don't perceive it that way. It's about actually making the road safer for them, as well as pedestrians and everybody else.
Yes. Isn't it also time, though, Nick, to take reality into account here and say, yes, it's all very well to say we want to encourage cycling, but what we don't want to do is encourage dangerous cycling or cycling in places where it's not really suitable to cycle. And I know that you and I have spoken about this many times. You know, there are plenty of routes in London and elsewhere where there are cycle lanes and all of that, but there are also many roads where there are not cycle lanes. And I wonder whether there might be something about possibly banning cyclists from going into certain parts of cities.
Well, I think, Mike, that's probably an extreme measure. I think we need extreme measures, though. Well, look, we've got very limited space, we've got limited resources, and we're trying to do the best we can. What really annoys me is when there's massive investment in cycle lanes and the cyclists are not using the cycle lanes. So I would definitely suggest it should be law. If there is a cycle lane, there is a mandatory requirement that you use it. And if you don't use it, you are disqualified, in my view. With this sentencing, obviously there's custody attached to it, as long as with other things, disqualification. People who cycle dangerously will lose their car licenses as well as their liberty. And again, that is something that will make the roads safer for everyone. So, you know, in an ideal world, we're all going to drive sensibly. We don't. In an ideal world, we're going to cycle sensibly. To stop cyclists, to say it's too dangerous, I think, to be honest, that's a step too far. But I do believe we need mandatory use of cycle lanes where they exist. Maybe we cannibalize a little bit of the pavement, a little bit of the road, because what we have at the moment is a very limited amount of road space, a massive amount of cars, and very few cyclists using the cycle lanes that are designated for their use, which it doesn't make economic sense, and it's just not a sensible use of the existing space we've got. So that is a problem that needs to be tackled.
No, absolutely. And I mean, let's not forget the reason we're talking about this, and we were talking about it just the other day, is the terrible case of the 81-year-old pensioner who was run over by a cyclist speeding through Regent's Park, doing about 30 miles an hour. Wasn't prosecuted because apparently there was no law in which to do so. But only last week there was a similar case in exactly the same spot where another cyclist ran into a woman who's now suffering. Luckily, she's a younger woman, but she's suffering from facial injuries and she's currently in hospital, recovering from being hit by the same spot where a cyclist apparently went round the outside of a central reservation in Regent's Park to overtake a car.
Yeah. Look, if you're racing, you're cycling dangerously. If you're racing a car, you're driving dangerously. It's as simple as that. This behaviour needs to be outlawed. It needs to be reserved for tracks, private property. You can't race around Regent's Park, exceeding the speed limit that exists for cars. And I do think that what will happen is the speed limits that exist for cars will be enforced for cyclists, because if cyclists don't comply with those speed limits, I anticipate they will be prosecuted for cycling either dangerously or without reasonable consideration.
Yes.
So I think we are going to see a change in the behaviour of cyclists. And as I say, it's not all cyclists, it's the minority, because they're now going to be held to account with very serious consequences. And, when you talk about cycling fast close to a pavement, as a driver, if you see a pedestrian on the pavement, you're anticipating there is a possibility that that pedestrian, who is number one in the hierarchy of vulnerability, is going to step out onto the road. You can't cycle with oblivion, say, I'm going to race around Regent's Park close to the curb with no expectation that someone's going to step out.
Right.
And so that sort of behaviour is going to have to change.
Yes.
It will change.
Well, let's hope you're right, Nick, and maybe this is the first step in the right direction for a long time. Nick Freeman, lawyer and road safety campaigner there, on the news that Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, is going to bring in a new law to make it capable for the law to actually punish cyclists who cycle dangerously.